want to discuss diabetes distress, burnout, and actually a huge component of getting diagnosed with a chronic condition. So, this is a huge deal. Being diagnosed with a lifelong chronic condition is a big deal. It's a big burden. And something like type 1 diabetes, where you are constantly having to think about blood sugars, constantly having to think about the effects of activity and food and sleep and what that's going to do to blood sugars. And so there is it's a lot of trauma, okay? And this is a big deal, and I want you to know that I recognize that. And there are lots of feelings that go with this, and they're all valid. Diabetes distress specifically refers to a set of feelings that come out of having to manage it, live through it, either as a child or be the parent of a child with diabetes. And it's not unlike any other trauma one may face. In some ways, there is sort of a cycle that one experiences after diagnosis. So it may initially be a bit of denial, especially if you are, say, in the hospital and watching these, or just got diagnosed. You may think it'll just go away. There might, a few weeks from now, days from now, maybe already has been a bit of anger, or a lot of anger. There might be some guilt associated. All of this is a pretty significant deal, and these emotions should not be shrugged away. I think they need to be validated. We need to help the child and help yourself as the caregiver cope with this and internalize what is happening, and then have some productive outlet for this. And the truth is that learning how to cope with this, just like any other major challenge and stressor in life, is a learned skill and sometimes requires professional help. So I typically screen for diabetes distress with validated psychometric screeners. And then depending on sort of the results, we can discuss what happens next. But it's important to find some good support, and I'm going to plug in the JDRF, which is the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. They may be able to give you some resources. Your local doctors and healthcare team probably also has resources. You may be part of a team that has access to a diabetes psychologist. So either way, I think this is a big deal, and we're here to help you. Don't suffer in silence. So what we're trying to avoid is burnout, and that is the stage where you just kind of give up and essentially don't care. The child doesn't care, and they're just sort of apathetic, and that tends to happen a couple of years, usually during the teenage years. So it's a huge burden, and we just need to be aware of what it is. So we have some tips for avoiding burnout. And again, one of my mentors used to say, or still probably does say, perfect is the enemy of good. We don't need to seek perfection in the management. Your blood sugars do not have to be perfect. Okay? There is a reason why the hemoglobin A1C target is 7% and not 5.5%. A person without diabetes typically has an A1C of mid-5s. 7% is where we currently think medical therapy and care today can get us safely. and minimize long-term consequences of health implications. We discussed avoiding value judgments based on the A1C, and trying to avoid language such as, such and such is a good blood sugar or bad sugar, or positively reinforcing certain behaviors and negatively reinforcing others. So, for example, you never want to praise a child for not eating carbs because their blood sugar will stay more in range. That does not bode well, because we're creating some a struggle that eventually can come out with food. We've talked a lot about acknowledging those feelings and finding support, and I think that's really important, just in everyone's life, really. And then, continuing to do things we enjoy. Diabetes and having a diagnosis of diabetes should never, ever be a reason not to engage in something or do something within reason. So, for the most part, if there are things a child enjoys, then with appropriate precautions and guidelines, they can continue to do those things, So there are lots of people, very famous people with type 1 diabetes. There is a Supreme Court justice who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes as a young child, and went on to achieve, great things academically, and sits in a very prestigious court. There are musicians, there are professional football players. So this is not a diagnosis that should be life-limiting. It is a challenge, but the goal is to give you the tools to get through, and your psychosocial health is just as important as sort of the medical blood sugar health, if you will. So part of this whole thing then is, celebrating things. And a lot of people refer to their dia birthdays or diaversaries. That's the day they were diagnosed. And I think, some people like to journal, or create a blog, or, I don't know, a video, or whatever it is. We just need to channel and express ourselves in a positive way. And finally, diabetes camps are really a wonderful place for children to meet others with type 1 diabetes. In some cases, for the first time, to feel like they are, everyone around them has diabetes as well. And everyone checks their blood sugars before meals, and everyone takes insulin. And so that's great. I'd alluded to and referred to JDRF before. I think that's a fantastic organization. Yearly, they have something called the JDRF One Walk in every city, or major cities anyway. And we welcome you to join us in our group. And then a few other things, November is usually Diabetes Awareness Month. And there are lots of events that occur there. So hopefully that is gives you some idea of how we think about an important aspect of diabetes that's not just insulin management.